This is the first applause I've ever gotten. So that's weird. All right, so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to do an attempt to give you kind of a good overview of what has happened to Iran over the course of the last 125 years. My goal in starting that far back is to give you some background, but my emphasis is going to probably be in the last 45 years as opposed to focusing on the front end of it. So let's just jump into it because there's no point in delaying. I want to start this story firmly nested in empire. And of course, in this case, the empire I'm talking about is the British Empire, because the Brits are going to play this really crucial role in shaping what Iran looks like today. And the reason is because Britain finds itself in a really awkward position. That awkward position is the following. In the late 1800s, so at the end of the 19th century, the British come to the conclusion that oil is the new coal, and that the future is definitely going to be oil. And the problem the British have is the Dutch have just bought their oil company. The British Oil Company was actually originally an antique dealership called Shell. And the Dutch company, Royal Dutch, bought Shell and had 51% controlling interest. So at that moment then, there's essentially two mega oil companies on the planet. The reason there's only two is because the United States has been overrun by a single oil company. One oil company has taken out all the other ones, and it's Standard Oil. So by the end of the 19th century, Standard Oil owns 95% of the US oil industry, and Royal Dutch Shell dominates the rest of the world, although Standard Oil is going overseas too, so it's these two companies. Britain has had a long, intertwined history with the Dutch, especially after William of Orange becomes King of England. And so it's not that the Dutch are their enemy, and of course they have a good relationship with us, so it's not that we're their enemy. They're not worried about, at some point the Dutch and the United States will betray them. They're worried about what happens if something happens to the Netherlands, what happens if the United States elects some nut job president and they derail themselves. We can't rely on others, we have to rely on ourselves. And they're thinking you can make a lot of money off of oil if we're right that oil is the future. The British don't know where to start, and then somebody comes up with a genius idea. What if you just read a bunch of history? And as you're reading the history books, you'll find a reference to prior use of oil. And then once you find that reference, then you just go to that place and look for oil. Because in the end of the 19th century, the way you look for oil is you looked at the ground and then you just went for a walk. If you got really lucky, you stepped in it and it went squish. There was so much oil on the planet, you could just step in it. Isn't that weird to think about? But odds are you're not going to get that lucky. What you're then looking for is black shale or black limestone. Those are really porous rocks. They'll pull the oil that's underneath into them and they'll go black. And that means there's probably oil there. And the way you got to the oil was a shovel and a pick. And you literally dug a well like you would dig a water well. And hopefully there's a little bit of pressure and the oil is just coming to the surface on its own. So that's what the Brits need to do. The problem is, where to even start? The planet's big. They own a huge chunk of it, but it's still big. And so the history books give them the answer. 1,000 years ago, the Middle East lit its streets up at night using oil lamps, which meant that medieval Arabs had oil, which meant there was probably oil somewhere in the Middle East. So that's where they decided to start looking. In anticipation of this, the Brits decide to expand their presence in the Arabian Gulf. Now, they already had, it's also called the Persian Gulf. I'm using the Arabian Gulf in this particular case because at the time the Brits were using it that way. I'm not going to take sides in the argument about whether it's the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. Perso-Arabian Gulf? No, it won't work. That's terrible. The reason the Brits have a presence already in the Arabian Gulf is the following. The Arab states that are today the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman had pirate fleets, and those pirate fleets were operating in the Arabian Sea, capturing British ships going back and forth between India and the British Empire. And it was driving the Brits absolutely bonkers. So in the early 19th century, the Brits either militarily engaged them or diplomatically engage them, and they make a deal to get them to stop attacking British shipping. And one of the deals the British end up naming that space the Trucial Coast because of the truce they made with those Arab pirates. And then that state, when it got its independence from the British, renamed itself the United Arab Emirates. So the Brits are already on the ground there, but they decide to expand, and the place they're thinking about ends up being Kuwait. They literally carve Kuwait out of the Ottoman Empire so that they're at the top of the Arabian Gulf, right next to the mouth of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Shatt al-Arab, where the two rivers come together. And that way they can militarily position themselves if they need to in the event they find the oil they think they might find. In 1901, a guy named Darcy approaches the Iranian government to see if he can get permission to explore for oil in southwest corner of Iran. The rulers of Iran at the time were the Qajars. The Qajars like to spend their days in opium dens. They were really into opium. Like that was their thing. Opium in the morning, opium in the afternoon, opium in the evening. They really liked it. So Darcy approaches the Iranian government, and the ruler at the time was a Qajar named Muzaffar ad-Din Shah, and he strikes a deal with him. Here's the deal. In the event that they do find oil, the Shah, the Qajar ruler of Iran, will get the equivalent in today dollars of about $2.5 million, just cash. In return, he'll also get 16% concession. So for every $100 that the British pull out of oil, the Shah will get 16 of those dollars, and the Brits get 84 of those dollars. That's an incredible deal. Like, you want Darcy negotiating every deal. We need to dig this guy up, find his DNA, and clone him. Usually it's a 50-50 split. It's Iranian oil, British effort. You split it 50-50. This is an 84-16 split. Or here's another possibility. Always negotiate with people who are high on opium. One of the two, not sure which. Darcy actually runs into a lot of trouble. He doesn't quite get what he wants in the beginning. His company is basically on the verge of going bankrupt. Long story short, they end up creating the Anglo-Persian Oil Company out of this thing, and it does find oil. Darcy was right. He was in the right place. They find oil, and they don't find a little bit. They find a lot. The Brits are filthy rich just off of this one event. They're so thrilled. It's great. It's the best thing ever. As World War I is approaching, the British realize, or they find out, that the Ottomans have just found oil. And the Ottomans have found oil in what is today northern Iraq. And so the Brits approach the Ottomans and say, look, we want that oil too. We want it all. And the Ottoman Empire goes, sorry, we already made a deal with the Germans. And so the British go, okay, we got your number. We got your number. We're going to take you down if there's ever a World War I. So the British and the French start planning for World War I. And the reason they're planning for World War I is because they're going to make it happen. The British especially are interested in this. In part because the British have a problem, another one. Oil was the first one, they've crossed that hurdle. But they have another problem. It's called the German Empire. This brand new state, because Germany's brand new. It was made in 1871. It's 95 years younger than the United States of America. You're young when you're a century younger than the United States of America. This brand new empire that came out of nowhere, basically, is a super industrial state making a massive navy. And the German ships are, of course, quality ships that are probably totally over-engineered. And the British ships are good, they're just not German quality. And so the British, every time the Germans build a ship, the British build 2 ships to make sure. Because the British know if the German Navy ever matches the British Navy. And so the British are stuck in this arms race with Germany. And both states are charging, they're careening towards bankruptcy. They can't keep building ships like this. They're just churning them out one at a time. Well, 2 at a time for the Brits. It's too expensive. So the Brits know something has to happen to knock Germany down a notch. And so they're sort of gearing their minds towards eventually doing that. World War I, of course, will break out. Just for the record, as it's unfolding, it unfolds for the dumbest reason on earth. Somebody gets assassinated. Like, who cares? I mean, I think at the end of the day, really, that you're going to start a whole global war for 4 years that's going to kill 13 million people for one dude. Who cares? Anyway, he was Archduke. Like, forget about it. He wasn't even like an emperor or something. As the declarations of war are going back and forth, leading towards this inevitable end, is it just me or is there a feedback thing going on? No, only I hear it? What? Oh, it's the air conditioning? Okay, cool. The Kaiser realizes this is a terrible disaster mistake, and he starts trying to figure out a way to back out of it. And he's like approaching the Brits going, wait, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And the Brits are like, no, it's too late. We're doing this. And we wanted this. This is going to happen. The British sit down with the French, and they work out a deal called Sykes-Picot. Sykes is the Brit. Picot is the French guy. They consult no one else. This is just an Anglo-French deal made in a vacuum, and even though it's going to involve a bunch of other actors. They basically whip out a crayon, they take a map of the Middle East, and they just start drawing off chunks of stuff. The Ottoman Empire is the prize. They're going to disassemble the Ottoman Empire. You got to remember, the Ottoman Empire was a global superpower at one point that was the rival of every European state and had higher tech than any European state. But the Ottoman Empire ran into a problem. And that problem really tore the Ottoman Empire up. And that problem originates in a philosophical argument that actually starts in the 11th century AD. And the argument is, how much philosophy and science and math really is enough? Is there a way to have too much of those things? Does it distract from the greater truths that religion affords? And the result is that the Muslim world now has a conservative movement that starts at the end of the 11th century. And by the time we get to the Ottoman Empire, that conservative movement is actually actively trying to stop the Ottoman Empire from innovating too quickly. So Ottoman rulers will take over, they'll try to put through a bunch of reforms because they're trying to change technology or behavior or economics or the military, and then they'll get pushed back, mostly from the military, and their reforms will go nowhere. And so the Ottoman Empire gets bogged down in this argument about whether religion should be at the center of this or politics should be at the center of this. And as a result, the Ottoman Empire starts to fall behind Europe instead of staying ahead of Europe. By the time we get to World War I, the Ottoman Empire is the old man, right? It's done, it's finished itself. It's shrunk dramatically. It doesn't have the tech to keep up. Here, let me give you a taste of what I mean by this. Not only did the Ottomans put Vienna under siege twice, the second time Vienna was done. The Ottomans almost took over Austria like it's insane. What was to stop them from just plowing through the Holy Roman Empire after that, taking out Italy? Austria was the linchpin. If they could grab Italy, the rest of Europe was wide open. It was Polish knights who actually wore wings as part of their uniform who charge into battle at the last minute and save the day. Like it needs to be a movie. I'm sure it is, but it needs to be a movie of quality. Let's do that. In the year 1700, as Prussia is redesigning itself, because it's merging with the Kingdom of Brandenburg, it actually had it. They're trying to figure out what Germany is going to look like in the year 1700, and they decide they're going to move the capital to Königsberg, which is outside of the Holy Roman Empire, so that the Kingdom of Prussia, which will include territory inside the Holy Roman Empire, namely Berlin and Brandenburg and that territory, that new state will be independent of the Holy Roman Emperor because it'll be outside. It needs a military, and it needs a really nice one. And they know that this Prussian military has to be really high quality because they're so severely outnumbered. So they send their officer corps to the Ottoman Empire to train with the Janissaries, because the Ottomans, they were the best soldier man for man. What you think of as Prussian military tradition largely comes out of this experience of these German officers training in the Ottoman Empire and taking those techniques back to Prussia and then Germanizing them. And before you know it, we have Bewegungskrieg. And the next thing you know, there's a Germany in 1871. So, it's way past that now. It's World War I. The Ottoman Empire has ruined itself with this anti-intellectual, anti-innovation sentiment. This conservative, let's just focus on religion, let's not advance ourselves technologically, culturally, and economically. Sounds familiar. So, I didn't mean to bring that to too contemporary. But there is a lesson here, I think. The British are going to carve off, when they got their crayon out and they got the map, they're going to carve off the western end of Turkey, so Izmir, and they're going to give that to Greece. They didn't tell the Greeks they were doing this, they're just doing it. So that's going to happen. They then take Palestine and what is today Jordan, and they draw that off, and that's going to go to the British. Syria and what is today Lebanon is going to go to the French. They actually originally drew Iraq for the French, because that way the French could have the northern Iraqi oil fields. That was the compromise with the French. And then came Iran. Now, Iran was not part of the Ottoman Empire. It was a separate independent state, but the British wanted to do Iran also. So they drew a line through the middle of Iran and split it into North Iran and South Iran. And the British were going to take South Iran and the Russians were going to take North Iran. And the British know that the Russians are willing to do this because it's something that's already happened where the British got the Russians to help them. So I need to roll the clock back just a bit. So in 1906, Iran got this fabulous idea. Really, the movement, I guess, started in 1905, but by 1906, this movement is taken off. And here's what Iran has in mind. It wants to become a democracy. The Iranians decide to make a play for democracy. In 1906, Muzaffar ad-Din Shah, the high as a kite opium Qajar ruler of Iran that did the 84% concession to the British, where he got 16%. That guy ends up signing basically a compromise with the pro-democracy movement to create the Majlis. The Majlis is Iran's parliament. So now Iran has a parliament with a prime minister. And then he dies the next year. But the British don't want Iran to have a democracy. The British are horrified at the prospect of Iran having a democracy. Because what happens if the Iranian people at some point down the road figure out that this oil concession in Khuzestan, in the southwest part of Iran, is a catastrophe for the Iranian people. They're literally giving their oil away. It's not even a 50-50 concession. If they figure this out, what's to prevent the Iranian democracy from voting to change this? So the British decide they need to do what every good empire does and destroy democracies in third world countries. Right? That's what you do. Oh no, brown and black people are getting a democracy. No, that's wrong. We gotta stop that. Stop that now. So the British figure the weak piece in Iran, in the Iranian state, is the clergy. Because the clergy are also not sure they want a democracy. So the British start funding the clergy and paying the clergy off with the hope that the clerics will help derail Iran's democracy. But that's not all. The British also then go to the Russians and go, how do you feel about invading from the north? We'll come in from the south. Let's just tear the place up a little bit, cause some harm, some pain, some suffering. We've got the clerics on our side, and maybe we can topple the democracy. It's a long story, and I probably should do it, but we're not gonna. And I just give you the sort of the nutshell end to this. By 1911, so 3 years before World War I breaks out, the dust settles on the pro-democracy movement. It took 5 years of struggle and suffering, and it mostly ends in failure. Iran does not come out of this as a democracy. But the seeds were planted. And one of the things that came out of this, first of all, the guy who replaces Muzaffar ad-Din Shah actually ends up getting toppled in 1909, Muhammad Ali Shah, and he's replaced by Ahmad Shah, who will be, just spoiler alert, the last Qajar ruler of Iran. He's the beginning of the end. 1909 is when he takes over. The revolutionary movement to democratize Iran finishes in 1911 with a constitutional monarchy. They end up with a constitution. They've codified the fact that there's a parliament. It's just not a very democratic system. But they've got the pieces to make one down the road. In other words, this is maybe a good first step, even if it wasn't a perfect first step. So now, back to World War I. So the British think, yeah, we've got the Russians. They'll just come on in on our side. They'll take the northern half of Iran. They're interested in it. We'll take the southern half. That's where the oil is. The Russians probably don't know. And it'll be perfect. Only it isn't. Because the British weren't counting on something. And that was that Germany would defeat Russia. You know, there's always this thing, you should never attack Russia because they always somehow prevail. I mean, usually somehow prevail might be better because they did it in World War I. They surrender. Now, they get real coy about it and they keep like pretending they're not going to surrender even after they've stopped fighting the war and they quit. But they eventually do surrender. And by the way, it's not the Russian Empire anymore because they've had these 2 revolutions. It's now the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. And so when the war ends, when it's 1918 and the Germans have finally surrendered, the British are like, even if the Russians were willing to do it, we can't work with them because they're communist. So we can't do Iran because the British didn't have the military ability to take the whole thing. And there's no way to invade half of it because the other half will fight you. You've got to do the whole thing. They needed to divide and conquer Iran. So the Brits go, oh, oops, sorry, France, I guess you're not getting Iraq. That's ours. We need that oil. And they switch the Sykes-Picot deal. The French go, whatever, and they go along with it. And so the Ottoman Empire gets carved up. The Greeks are, of course, thrilled to find out that they're getting the Western peace. They send soldiers into Izmir. They begin committing acts of genocide against the Turks because they're trying to ethnically cleanse it. It's a nightmare disaster. And you think, why are you doing this? The Italians moved into the coastal region on the southern part of Turkey. They're thrilled. They're like, wow, look at all this free real estate. We did poorly in World War I, but we picked the right side. You know, it's okay to kind of lose militarily as long as you're on the right side. And of course, the Ottoman Empire recovers. It drives the Greeks and the Italians out. It even gets a concession from the French so that Antioch won't be in Syria, and they pull it into Turkey. So it doesn't end up quite with the exact crayon-drawn border that the British and the French had come up with. There's a little modification. For Iran, right, it's a sigh of relief they didn't get conquered. Iran has the glory of being one of the only states on the planet to not get colonized by Europe. There aren't many, right? Liberia is one of them. Now, Liberia did get colonized, but ironically enough, it got colonized by African Americans returning to Africa. And the United States sort of put a protectorate over it so that nobody would mess with it. Thailand did not get conquered by a European state. Japan did not get conquered. The Ottoman Empire definitely got carved up like a Thanksgiving Day turkey, pun intended. But Turkey effectively avoided the European conquest. And then Persia. That's it, because even right at the end, right before World War II, Ethiopia gets conquered briefly by the Italians. It's the second time the Italians attack Ethiopia. The first time they were destroyed by the Ethiopians. Second time the Italians attack Ethiopia. Did I say it right? I don't know. It came through, in my head it came out backwards. But so Iran survives World War I without being Sykes-Picoed. I'm pretty sure that needs to become a verb. They're unstable though. So ever since the 1906 attempt at becoming a democracy, even though it effectively all stops in 1911, it doesn't. There's this percolating instability that keeps rolling through Iran. And in fact, in 1920, there is a guy, Mirza Kuchuk Shah, who is a communist, who decides he's going to break a piece of Iran out of Iran and make the Persian Socialist Soviet Republic, the PSSR. And he does. He takes the Gilan province out of Iran, and it's sometimes called the Gilan Socialist Soviet Republic. And they rule it from June 1920 to September 1921. It doesn't go on particularly long period of time. And one of the reasons that it fails is the Russians had definitely been involved with this, right? The Soviet Union was eager to see if it couldn't maybe expand outward a little bit. The Russians decide that this isn't worth their resources. The Russians are kind of hoping that the civil war will end, because the Russians are in the middle of a civil war, and so they stop backing it. And the Persian Socialist Soviet Republic ends after a year and a half. But it's in that span of time, in that year and a half span of time, that a major political shift takes place. Earlier in 1921, Reza Shah Pahlavi, who was a Cossack. So when you think of Cossacks, you probably think of Russians and cavalry units charging in and slaughtering peasants. I need you to have that image, but put him in Iran, because it's the same thing. He's a Cossack, and he's in command of a Cossack unit in Qazvin. And he is sick and tired of the complete chaos that Iran is in. So he takes his unit, he takes command of his unit, and he actually marches to Tehran, and they capture it. They capture the capital of Iran. He topples the existing government. He replaces the prime minister with his guy, Tabatabai, and he becomes the commander-in-chief of the Iranian army, Iranian military. And then 2 years later, he replaces the prime minister because he starts arguing with him, and he becomes the prime minister. And then in 1925, so 2 years after that, he's in a position now where he can make a serious move and take more control over Iran. Reza Shah has in mind that he's going to become the Ataturk of Iran. So Ataturk, after the Ottoman Empire was disassembled, he decided okay, there's no more Ottoman Empire, we're now Turkey, and then he decided, I'm going to modernize it in my own image. And I'm going to take Turkey and make it into this new thing. I'm going to change the letters it uses to write its language. I'm going to change the language. Ataturk ordered that Turkish be purged of its Arabic and Persian words. And it had a lot of Arabic and Persian. And then they switched the alphabet from Arabic alphabet to the Latin alphabet. So Turks today can't read any of their literature that's more than 100 years old because, first of all, the letters are unrecognizable to them. But even if they get past that and learn the Arabic letters, they have to now learn these Arabic and Persian words that have been deleted from their language. Reza Shah maybe isn't planning to go that far, but what he does want to do is dramatically change Persia so that it's no longer this third world country that's backwards, that isn't modernized. He wants to advance it. His original position, his original goal, his original objective was to do like Turkey and create a republic. But he ran head on into the clergy. The clerics did not want this democracy thing. They were just against it every step of the way. They were like, what will the people decide? We don't want this. And he had a problem with the British. The British made it also very clear that they simply did not want Iran to become a democracy. Whatever kind of republic you end up with, that was off the table. And so, in the end, he yields to pressure from the clerics and from the British, and he goes to the Majlis, he goes to Parliament and says, we got to do something, we've got to have a stable state. It seems to me the only way forward is monarchy. Make me Shah. And they do. And they replace out Ahmed Shah, and that's the end of the Qajars. Ahmed Shah is the last Qajar ruler. Reza Shah Pahlavi becomes the first Pahlavi Shah of Iran. And he begins the modernization process. As a monarch, he has a lot more control over exactly how this unfolds, but it also means the people have little control over how this unfolds. It's really just him making the decisions, him and then the rubber stamp parliament. And then things go wrong. There's this catastrophic event that has global repercussions that we're still dealing with called World War II. And he probably would have been okay, except the Germans got this crazy idea that 70 million people could attack 170 million people and somehow defeat the 170 million people with inferior tanks and an inferior air force. Just to give you an idea how insane this is, when the German army was lined up against the Russians, actually, let's just do Operation Barbarossa because I don't want to make it too complicated. There were 5,000 German tanks in Operation Barbarossa, 3,500 when they lined up, and then they got 1,500 reinforcements throughout 1941. So it ends up 5,000. The Russians had 22,000 tanks. 2,000 of the Russian 22,000 tanks were superior to everything the Germans had. I know. The Germans make everything better. Not then, not tanks. The Russians had KV-1s and T-34s, and they were better than anything the Germans had to field. In other words, the Russians should have destroyed the Germans in Operation Barbarossa. It should have been an annihilation. It was the Russians who got the annihilation, not the Germans. It makes no sense when you look at the numbers and you look at the technology involved. But anyway, that's what happens. Well, when it happens, when the Germans attack the Soviet Union, the British and the Russians decide, well, because now Britain isn't alone anymore, right? Now they finally have somebody, because the Germans take out France, and now all of a sudden Britain's alone, and then the Germans attack Greece, and the British are like, oh my God, Greece, you could be our, not gonna, all right. Anyway, we're alone again. It was one of those tragic, almost had a friend moment. So when the Soviet Union gets attacked, Churchill's like, Stalin, best friends forever. And so they start trying to work out how the Brits can help, because the Russians are getting torn to shreds, even though they should have been totally destroying Germany. And it's getting desperate. It's bad. Of the 22,000 tanks, there are none left by 41. But the Germans still have like 3,000. It was just disaster. The Russians are surrendering millions of men at a time. It's just like the Germans are like, what do we do? What do we do with them? Why did we attack this place? Germany ends up conquering an area like 5 times larger than Germany. They're like, well, this country doesn't end. We've conquered literally 10% of it. Why did we attack this thing? Anyway, so the British and the Russians decide, you know what? Isn't it a shame we didn't split Iran in half at the end of World War I? Is it really ever too late? And Stalin goes, no, of course not. And the British invade Iran from the south, and the Russians invade Iran from the north. And by September, the Iranian military just throws its guns down and runs. The modernized Reza Shah military that was supposed to defend Iran just disintegrates in front of the British and the Russian forces. They don't even put up a fight. He's freaking out. He can't believe it. Before he knows it, the British and the Russians are in Tehran. They capture him and his family, and they make a deal with him. They say, look, if you step down, you go under house arrest, we'll send you to some nice part of the empire, maybe Egypt, maybe Uganda, who knows? The Mauritius Islands looks good. Who doesn't want to go to the Mauritius? And then we'll let your family live. In fact, we'll let your son become the Shah of Iran. And Reza Shah goes, what choice do I have? My army didn't fight. And he abdicates. And I think it was September, well, maybe it was later. Yeah, sometime late 1941, since I'm not drawing the right month. Now his son is in charge. His son ends up just being called the Shah. So he's in. The British and the Russians occupy Iran until the end of the war. And the reason they did this officially was because this was a way now the British could ensure that supplies could be delivered to Russia through Iran. Because you couldn't, like, the obvious way to go would be to go to Murmansk or Arkhangelsk in the very far north of Russia, past Finland. The problem is the Russians had Norway. The Germans had Norway. So the Germans could fly aircraft from Norway and try to sink British shipping going across that way. So it was dangerous. The British were doing it, it's just they were going to take losses doing it. So the way to go without taking losses was to go all the way, well, they wanted to go through the Mediterranean, but there were those obnoxious Italians trying to mess with them. So they'd have to go all the way around Africa and then through Iran and into Russia that way. That's why they did it. And then, of course, once the United States enters the war, we also send some supplies that way as well. So the war ends, the British withdraw, the Russians mostly withdraw, but they stop in Azerbaijan. The reason they stopped in Azerbaijan was, before the Qajars, there was the Safavids. The Safavids, the rulers of Iran, conquered the Caucasus Mountains. They didn't quite finish the job. They missed the westernmost 10% of it. The Ottoman Empire grabbed that. But they had about 90% of the Caucasus Mountains. Well, during the Napoleonic Wars, and then again a little bit afterwards in the 1820s, the Russian Empire attacked the Qajars, because the Qajars took over by this point. The Safavids were no longer in charge. And they carved off the Persian Empire's Caucasus region. Well, when they did that, there was a territory inside Iran called Azerbaijan, and the Russians split it in half. And so the Russians took the northern half of Azerbaijan and left the southern half of Azerbaijan in Iran. The Azeris are Turks. So the Russians at the end of the war are like, you know what, let's just put Azerbaijan together. And in that way, the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic will be whole because it'll be both the north and the south. For the record, Turks are about 18% of Iran's population. Iran's about 60% Persian. It's about 2% Arab, about 10% Kurdish, about 2% Baluchi, and then 2% if you take the Armenians, the Georgians, the Circassians, and the Assyrians and put them together. They're another 2 or so percent. So Iran's actually quite diverse. Ethno-linguistically, the Baluchis, the Iranians, and the Kurds are related to each other. They speak Persian languages from the Persian Indian language group. The Indus River is effectively the boundary between the Persian languages and the Indian languages, from the Aryan language groups. This drives Indians nuts, but I gotta do it. So the Aryans conquered most of India and brought Aryan languages with them. There's this Indian nationalist movement that says, no, the Aryans were always there. That doesn't make sense, but go ahead. I have a lot of Indian viewers. They're raging right now, but we turned off the ability to comment, so that's perfect. I love my Indian viewers, so this is just me. It's okay. The Aryans also conquered Europe. Like, there's no shame in this. They're the guys who domesticated the horse. They get to conquer a huge chunk of land because they domesticated the horse, the greatest weapon in human history. You gotta love the horse. Like, there was such a good weapon, we were still using it in World War II. Not the US and Great Britain. They were the first countries to jettison the horse. We did it with Gatling guns. We just took the Army's horse out into the middle of nowhere, Montana, and shot them to death. But we did it, and we switched over to trucks. But Germans, the Russians, the Italians, the French, everybody else is still using the horse in World War II. Isn't that crazy? It's hard to comprehend. Wait a minute, so there was nukes? Yeah, and the horse. Feels like it doesn't, but you had tanks, but we also had horses. Anyway. It's cool though when you think about it. It's like this clash between this ancient world and this high-tech world. We should bring the horse back. Why did we shoot the horses, you asked? That's a great question. Nobody actually asked that. I just decided to answer it. Because it's capitalism. If we had sold the horses, it would have crashed their value, and it would have pissed off all the horse breeders. So if we had sold it for meat, it would have crashed the value of meat. So the only thing to do is shoot them. Right? No, this is capitalism. I don't know why you're looking at me like that. It's weird. It's how this works. What we don't sell, we shoot. It's the economic system. It is. All right, so it's the Russians are holding on to Azerbaijan. They're planning to put it back together. In 1946, the United States goes, give it back to Iran. And the Russians go, but why? It's not fair to the Azerbaijanis. They should be reunited. We go, we'll nuke you. They go, okay, here we go. And that was it. Because that was the time period where we threatened to nuke everybody at the drop of a hat. The United States kept doing that right up into like 1960-something. 63, I feel like is a good number. I'm just a random number. We just, drop of a hat, we're like, you know what, we'll nuke you. And everybody walked away. 1958, we threatened to nuke Iraq. So, Iran is back intact. The war is over. It's 46. And the Iranians get that idea again. What if we did democracy? Talk about stubborn. Like, when are you going to get it through your head that you're not going to do democracy because the British or the Americans are going to stop you? In 1951, Iran has as its new prime minister a guy named Mossadegh. Mossadegh is going to do it. He's the architect of this. He wants to modernize Iran, so he's going to pick up Reza Shah's banner. He's also going to try to fulfill its deep desire to be this democracy. So he's going to try and do both of those things. He knows there's no doing it without that oil. He needs the oil because he needs the money. Because how are you going to build the infrastructure to create a modern society without money? Right? Look at Texas. It's literally crumbling. Why? Because the rich don't pay taxes. There's no money for infrastructure. There's no money for development. We are billions of dollars behind in Texas on infrastructure. Billions. Like if we started right now, it would take us years to catch up. Don't worry, crumbled bridges are fantastic. You can totally still cross them. I have a picture in my office of Russian soldiers and American soldiers reaching across the Elbe River because they're on a bridge. The bridge is smashed to pieces, but there they are like, oh, because they want to shake hands because, right, they've met, the two armies have met, it's the end of World War II. It's like May 7, 1945. See, it's a smashed bridge, it works. Well, you gotta be so picky. So, Mossadegh decides the number one threat that he has is the Brits. So before he can do any move, he shuts down the British embassy. Why the British embassy? Well, because embassies are sovereign territory of the country that's hosted. So the British embassy is actually the United Kingdom. It's not Iran. And diplomats get diplomatic immunity. So your spies are your diplomats, and they freely operate out of your sovereign territory, the embassy. So if you're worried that spies are going to topple your government, shut down that embassy. So that's what he does. He shuts it down. And then he goes to the Anglo-Iranian oil company. It changed its name from Anglo-Persian to Anglo-Iranian because part of the modernization Reza Shah does is he switches the name from Persia to Iran. For the record, for etymology purposes, just because these things matter, the original name of Iran was Iran. Iran is the original name. Iran was the Persian word for Aryan. They were the Aryans. By the way, there's another country on earth named Aryan. It's not just Iran. Ern. E-I-R-E, Ern. Ireland. Ireland is literally Aryan. So there's two Aryans on earth. It's Iran and Ireland. Isn't that cool? And so what happened was the Greeks, of course this is going to go to the Greeks, it has to. We had to bring the Greeks in somehow. The Greeks believed that Perseus, the son of Zeus, married Cassiopeia, the daughter of Andromeda. Isn't that cool? They're marrying constellations. And their children are the Persians. And that's why they're called the Persians. They're named after Perseus, the son of Zeus. Isn't that cool? Andromeda was the queen of Ethiopia. So Zeus's son and the Ethiopian princess, they together produced the Persians, according to the Greeks. Hence the name Persia after Perseus. So Persia became the name, but it was the foreigner name. And so Reza Shah wanted to go back to the original, actual Iranian name. And that's why he picks Iran. It's an attempt to sort of get out of that. So there's this dialogue in when we talk about Iran, like, should I say Persia or Iran? Should I say Iranian? Like, so generally when we say Persian, we mean the people who speak Persian, which is the language. It used to be Farsi, but Farsi was the Arabic attempt to pronounce Persian because there's no pa in Arabic. They just made it a fa. So the Persians now have said, no, we have pa. And so they brought the pa back. And so now it's Persia again, and it's the Persian language. So stop saying Farsi. That's past. It makes you look old. Unless you're young, and then say it so that you sound sophisticated. So usually when we talk about Iran, we mean the country, and then the Persians are the Persian language speakers. So then you will hear Kurds from Iran or Baluchis from Iran say very loudly, we are Iranian. But they're not saying very loudly, we are Persian. And so that's sort of how this has evolved, but there's nothing solid about any of this. This is just sort of a superimposition. For the record, if you're Baluchi, Dari, Tajik, If you're from Western Pakistan, and then all Kurdish, Iranian, that's the Iranian language group. So there is actually real connectivity there. In any case, Mossadegh shuts down the British embassy, kicks the Brits out, and then grabs hold of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and renames it the National Iranian Oil Company and terminates the concession. It's not 50-50, it's 0-100 now. And so it's not 84-16, it's 0-100. And his justification is, it's Iranian oil, Iranians know how to extract it, we don't need the Brits. Why are the Brits here? Why are they doing this? What benefit does Iran get from this? None. Out. Now we're going to use this money to modernize. The Brits can't overthrow him because the embassy's closed. So the Brits actually go to President Truman and they go, the American embassy is still open. What do you say? And Truman goes, oh, no. The United States doesn't overthrow democracies. So that's a bold-faced lie. And Harry S. Truman knew it was because we had literally just overthrown the brand new Syrian democracy. It was 3 years old in 1949. It's one of the CIA's first ever operations. A guy named Miles Copeland, the musician, his son became the drummer for the Police. So, just to connect some weird dots, Miles Copeland, the jazz musician, the white jazz musician, I didn't want you thinking that suddenly the CIA had like black operatives working in Syria. He overthrows the Syrian government of al-Quwatli 3 years in, and it plunges Syria into nightmare chaos. Over the next 9 years, they'll have 11 governments. The only thing that stops it from being even worse is al-Quwatli somehow gets back into power, stabilizes Syria, and then goes to the president of Egypt and goes, if you don't annex us right now, the communists are going to take over, and Egypt annexes Syria. Like, that's how bad the overthrow event was. It destroyed the Syrian state. It couldn't function anymore. So Truman did overthrow democracies, just for clarity's sake, but he turns to the Brits and he goes, we don't do that. Eisenhower is running for office the next year. It's 1952. Eisenhower's going to win. Eisenhower is a supreme Allied commander in World War II. Eisenhower's going to win. Everybody loved Ike. I mean, that was his slogan. I like Ike, right? Everybody loved Ike. They didn't like him. They loved him. So he was going to win. The Democrats approached him at the same time as the Republicans and said, would you run for president as our candidate? And he went, I don't know what party I belong to. I have an idea. I'm going to go out into the mountains and hang out in a cabin for a while. I'll get back to you. He came back from the mountains. He goes, I'm a Republican. Many Democrats are still weeping to this day. Eisenhower is approached by the Brits before he's even become president. And the Brits go, so we have a problem in Iran. We just lost our oil. We don't know how God put it underneath Khuzestan like that. That just seems unfair. But we've been pumping it out of Khuzestan as fast as we can, but we didn't get all of it. And Eisenhower goes, I got you. We got through World War II together. Don't worry about it. He becomes president in 1953. He orders the CIA to take out Iran's second attempt at democracy. Isn't that cool? That CIA operative is Kermit Roosevelt, as in the grandson of Theodore, as in the grandson of the former president. Now, Kermit Roosevelt comes up with a brilliant idea. All he has to do is take bags of CIA money. And he can just walk up. By the way, they tried to do this in Egypt already. No, was it later that? It was right around 53 they tried to do this in Egypt. I don't remember. A year before, a year after, they literally walked up to the president, Mohammed Najib. Egypt had just had a revolution in 52 and got rid of its monarchy. And the CIA went with bags of money into Mohammed Najib's office. Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was a colonel, who wasn't the president of Egypt, followed the CIA operatives in, pulled the bags of money out of the brand new president's office, and built a tower in the shape of a lotus with a revolving restaurant on the top on an island in the middle of the Nile with that CIA money. Isn't that cool? And as a result, prevented the CIA from effectively bribing the president of Egypt. Anyway, so that's Kermit Roosevelt's idea. He's not going to bribe Mossadegh. There's no bribing him. Mossadegh is clearly a believer. He's dedicated to his cause. What Kermit's going to do is he's going to bribe members of the military. He gets them on board to do a coup d'etat. It's like 3 a.m. There's a knock at Mossadegh's door. The prime minister opens the door, and there's an officer standing there. He goes, "Prime Minister Mossadegh, you are under arrest." And Mossadegh goes, "No, you are." And all of a sudden, a bunch of soldiers come out of the bushes that were hidden in Mossadegh's front lawn, and they mass arrest the coup conspirators. Kermit Roosevelt was just like a block away watching the operation. He sees what's happening. He's running down the streets of Tehran like the Bionic Man trying to get away, and he escapes into the shadows. Eisenhower finds out what's happened. He orders Kermit Roosevelt to back down. Roosevelt goes, "You sent me here to overthrow this democracy. By God, I'm going to overthrow it." And so he meets with Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., not the guy, the general, his dad. Isn't this cool? All you have to do in the United States is just memorize a few names, and then they just repeat over the generations, like in a hereditary nobility system. Like here, it's everything. It's not just generals and politicians. You know, like the USS McCain, it's not named after Senator John McCain, it's his dad. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to do Hollywood. Find your favorite Hollywood actor or actress. I bet their dad or mom was a Hollywood actor or actress. Do it. Do it as a little thing. You'll see. It's all hereditary. Anyway, so he goes to Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., who was a merchant who traded with Middle Eastern countries. And he goes, "You know the Iranian people. What should I do? I don't know what to do. I'm hosed. I'm actually rogue right now because I've been ordered to stand down. How do I pull this off?" And Schwarzkopf says, "Dude, you've got bags of money, right?" He's like, "Yeah. What do I do with it?" Schwarzkopf goes, "Go and hire the day laborers from the corner." And Roosevelt goes, "To do what?" And then Schwarzkopf says, "Pro-Mossadegh rallies." Roosevelt's like, "You're insane. Why would I have him do pro-Mossadegh rallies? I'm trying to overthrow Mossadegh." "Yeah, after the rally, have them go on a rampage and loot stuff, smash out windows, steal things from stores, flip over cars, set things on fire." And Roosevelt goes, "You're a genius." And so that's what they do. The CIA starts hiring day laborers to do these pro-Mossadegh rallies and then trash Tehran. And they do it day after day. And Mossadegh keeps getting up in front of the country and going, "What are you doing? If you're my people, why are you trashing our country? I'm trying to modernize our country. Stop ending your rallies with rally in favor of me. I love it. Who doesn't love that? Don't break anything. Why are you breaking things?" And they do this until the military's had enough. The military does a coup d'etat. And Iran's second democracy goes down in a ball of flames. At that point then, the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, is in position as the monarch to basically take over. So that thing where the Majlis and the prime minister were going to be in charge evaporates. And for the next 25 and a half years then, the Shah becomes the tyrant ruling Iran. He is not kind. You do not want to defy him. He does not accept opposition forces. You will go to prison, you will be tortured, He is cruel. He's a tyrant. He does try to modernize Iran, and he does do some interesting attempts. Like, it's not all bad. Like, there's the White Revolution. Oh, wait, was that all bad? Anyway, the White Revolution definitely had problems. But there were definitely parts of what the Shah does that were good. They did help modernize Iran. He modernizes the military. But in the process, Iran pays a really interesting price. And the price is complicated because Turkey paid the same price. I just told you they lose their literature, for example. There's a cultural erosion that's taking place because as the modernization takes place, and they do things like the white revolution. Why'd you pick white as the color? There becomes this thing that Iranians get wrapped up into of aspiring to whiteness. So to the point where Iranians go, I'm Aryan. I'm not Arab. I'm Aryan. I'm Persian. And there is this separation, because they're not Arab. They speak a different language. They were never conquered like Egypt was by the Arabs. Egypt wasn't Arab either, but the Arabs totally conquered Egypt. So it was like, what? 3% of the population speaks Nubian, and maybe 2% of the population speaks Coptic. The rest of Egypt speaks Arabic. They're Arab. It's over. Right? But in the case of Persia, they never lost their language, and their cultural identity marker was never destroyed. So that's there. But the problem is now that they're in this aspiring to whiteness thing, which drives this new nationalist thing. And it results in a really weird mix of cultural adaptation. So for example, the Shah keeps looking to the past. His hero is Cyrus the Great, Kurosh. By the way, my hero is Cyrus the Great too. Kurosh was simply one of the greatest human beings to ever walk the planet Earth. He issued the world's first ever Bill of Rights. Right? I mean, that's really cool. In the 6th century BC, so almost 26 centuries ago, almost 2,600 years ago, he issued the world's first Bill of Rights. He translated it into every language of the empire. We actually have the text. So I don't think we have a complete version, but we have a mostly complete version. If you ever go to the UN building, there's a text. I think it's in 4 languages over the front door. That's it. That's Cyrus the Great's Bill of Rights. It's on the UN building. The Persians are right to look to Cyrus the Great, the guy who created the Persian Empire, and go, wow, that guy. By the way, his empire was expressly one of diversity. He intentionally told all the conquered nations that were part of the empire, you're not only full members and partners of the empire, we want you to speak your own language and have your own religion and be different. He actually said diversity makes us stronger. Can you imagine? So weird. Crush them like the Romans did. Or the Brits tried to do. Anyway, so there's this reminiscing of the past that goes on. And that past is largely pre-Islamic, but not exclusively pre-Islamic, because there are these features of Iranian culture, like Rumi, that you don't ever mess with, that'll always be a core piece of Iranian culture. But part of this going to the past thing also included having like these really amazing spectacles at places like Takht-i-Jamshid. So Alexander the Great didn't know it existed. It was one of the capitals of Iran, but it was a secret capital of Iran. And so when he found it, he destroyed it, of course. That's what you should do when you discover there's a city you didn't know about, just wipe it out. Anyway, he destroyed it, but he also called it Persepolis, as in the city of Perseus. Because, right, the Persians are the descendants of Perseus. So of course it's Persepolis. So if you look it up in English, you probably know it as Persepolis or Persepolis, if you want to pronounce it that way. But the Persians call it Takht-i-Jamshid. By the way, just for the record, I've been there. It is definitely worth the trip. It is a fantastic ruin. the Shah does this gigantic thing, spending millions of dollars to basically have a big pageant fest there, because he's trying to bring back the glory that was. And some of that doesn't click with the public. They're trying to figure out, I'm in poverty and you're spending all this money in pageantry. Well, why aren't you spending this money developing the economy, developing our infrastructure, educating our kids? And so there's a little bit of disconnect going on. But also, there's a cultural problem because Iran becomes known as Little America. Because so we do the coup for the Brits, only we don't really do the coup for the Brits. Because Eisenhower had as one of his goals the destruction of the French and British empires. Eisenhower intended to destroy the British and French empires and then replace them both. It's why we do the Vietnam War. That's our attempt to replace the French Empire in Southeast Asia. Isn't that cool? So after we do the coup in Iran, the Brits are like, oh, thank you. And Eisenhower's like, no, dude, that's ours now. That's how that works. We did the coup. The Brits still have a role to play, but they're going to be second fiddle, right? This is our thing now. And so before you know it, Iran is known as Little America. It also gets the nickname the shopping mall of the Middle East, right? Because if you think of the quintessential thing that makes America America, it's shopping malls. And so, boom, there it is, the shopping mall of the Middle East. The most common surgery done in Iran is nose surgery. I don't think that's changed. I think that's still the case. When I was there in 2002, I swear 1 out of every 10 women walking down the street had a splint over her nose. And then, of course, bleach was the most common sold chemical in Iran because everybody now wanted to be blonde. And my favorite album cover ever is Gagoosh with cowboy hat and pistols. Gagoosh, of course, being one of my favorite Iranian pop singers because she is truly amazing. This isn't an attack on Gagoosh at all, I swear. It's just, there's this strange thing happening. And some of it is flattering. For example, we sell Iran F-14s. Only 2 countries on the planet ever had the best airplane ever made. It's no longer in commission, which breaks my heart, but the recent Top Gun movie solved that problem for me, which is the only reason I could enjoy it. The F-14 is truly a splendid piece of machinery, and Iran and the United States are the 2 states that had it. Isn't that crazy? Remember Iran-Contra? You probably don't, you're too young. The spare parts that Oliver North was selling Iran, some of those were F-14 spare parts. I'm going to talk about Iran-Contra. But it's just too fun to think about. The Shah starts to run into trouble. His status in the state is unpopular. He is a tyrant. He's been too rough with the Iranian people. He's been too hard on opposition forces. And the reason that he has to be is, you're not going to believe this, the Iranians still want to do democracy. And they've got this monarch who's saying no. And they're not okay with no. They're not taking no as an answer. And this is causing this constant struggle. And so Carter becomes president. James Earl Carter, known as Jimmy, that guy. And Carter looks at the Shah and goes, it's time to liberalize. It's time. You need to start making steps in that direction. So the Shah goes, okay, what choice do I have? I have to do what the President of the United States says. So he starts opening up press. And while the press is going nuts, anti-Shah everything. It's crazy. It's full on. It's like 1978 and every newspaper is trashing the Shah. The Shah gets sick because he gets cancer. He needs treatment. He leaves Iran to go get treatment, and a revolution breaks out. And in spring of 1979, the Shah's toppled. He ends up in Panama at one point. He finally gets to Egypt, where he dies, where he's buried, where his dad's buried, because after the British shuffled his dad around, they buried him in Egypt. Although now there seems to be some evidence that maybe he was actually buried in Iran. Anyway, who knows where he is. But his son is in Egypt for sure. That's clear. By the way, in the beginning part of the Shah's reign, there was actually conversations about like how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this work? And there was a lot of pressure put on him to do like a traditional style. Let's get alliances going. And so he actually married an Egyptian princess, Fawzia, with the goal of then kind of cementing this Egyptian alliance with Iran, because Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Pakistan had formed a formal alliance, and they were trying to figure out how to get Egypt into it. And the goal behind the alliance was to create an Islamic bloc so that if European states went into colonialism mode again in the future, that at least the Muslim states would have a means to push back and have resistance. And so he marries Fawzia, but it's a disaster marriage, and they end up divorced, so it didn't work. Anyway, so the Shah has this interesting connection to Egypt. In any case, the Shah goes down, and there's this really interesting moment where Iran could go one of two ways. It could go communist or socialist, because the communists and socialists were working together at that point, or it could go Islamist. It could create the Islamic Republic. Those were the two directions it could go. And we knew what would happen if it went communist. It'd become a Soviet ally. So we didn't want that. We knew no matter what happened, we were losing Iran, because we had played too heavy of a role in the Shah's heavy-handedness. We were too involved. There was no way our friendship was going to survive this. And then, of course, there's this pendulum swing thing that people do. So all of a sudden, everybody wants to look like they have a European nose with blonde hair, and now all of a sudden, everybody's rejecting that. And in that moment, there is a lot of anti-US sentiment because we played such a nasty role, including overthrowing their democracy in 1953 and sticking them with the tyrant to begin with. And so a lot of the rhetoric coming out of the revolution is fiercely anti-American. So we know we've lost Iran, but we don't want Iran to become a Soviet ally. So the best thing to do then is to push Iran into the Islamist direction. And we weaponized the Ayatollah Khomeini, who, of course, had a tour of duty in Iraq and a tour of duty in France, and the next thing you know, he's now in Iran. And he was a truly charismatic character. He was a believer. He probably meant to make the world heaven on earth. But he's so charismatic, he'll make the decision between the left and the right, and Iran will go Islamist. In the chaos of Iran going Islamist, the left, the socialists and the communists, had been working with the Islamists, thinking, an enemy of an enemy is a friend, and on the other end of the revolution, we'll figure it out. Well, it got figured out, and the left got massacred. It was a slaughter. Leftists are fleeing in every direction they can to get out of the country because they're hosed. The Islamists also massacre the military. The officer corps, not the enlisted. The generals, the admirals are wiped out. Some of the Air Force generals escape by plane. The Army guys are hosed because they're just sitting there on the ground. The admirals are decapitated. Some of the Air Force generals get killed as well. It's a disaster because they're now creating a new state. And this new state is going to be the Islamic Republic. They're going to impose Shia-style Islam through a theocracy on the Iranian people. But in that moment of the revolution, the Iranian people actually experienced this incredible moment of freedom. Because in that moment of the revolution, there really isn't a state apparatus. So it's sort of like this anarchist dream where the state hasn't established itself, the new state. It's thinking about what rules to impose, but even if it imposed them, it wouldn't have the force to do it because it doesn't have anything to do it with. It still has to create its police force and its laws, right? Its new constitution. And in that moment, there's this incredible freedom that will abruptly end as soon as the state has established itself. In that same year, 1979, a group of college students get a crazy idea. What if we broke into, this is what they're saying, this is their dialogue, the US Embassy, and we could get a hold of the CIA documents that show that the US overthrew the democracy in 1953. Then we could show the world, and maybe the United States would apologize for it. And then we could start healing from this wound. And so a group of college students start heading to the US Embassy. Well, most of the US Embassy staff had already been evacuated. There were like 4 civilians left at that point, and they get word that the students are coming and they escape to the Canadian Embassy. But there's 66 CIA operatives still there because Iran wasn't just the headquarters for the CIA operations in Iran. Iran was the headquarters for CIA operations in Asia. So basically everything from Turkey to China operated out of Tehran, to the point where we had the minting plates for $20 bills there. So San Francisco, Denver, Philadelphia, and Tehran. That's where we minted US money. Those are the official mints. Isn't that cool? Because the CIA needed the cash, right? When it's overthrowing democracies, that's not cheap. You gotta pay for that stuff. $20 bills are a fantastic way to pay for everything, it turns out. And so that's what they did. When we were doing the Sunni awakening in Iraq, we literally had boxes of $20 bills, and we just drive around with forklifts delivering these crates of $20 bills. I don't know what it is about $20 bills, but so that's the thing. I think it's easier to buy AK-47s with them for some reason. Not sure. So, the brand new Islamic Republic that doesn't want anything to do with what the students are about to do calls the US Embassy, because the US Embassy is officially United States of America. So as soon as those kids climb over the wall, they're in the United States of America trespassing. This is an international incident. And so they call the embassy, they're like, dude, get the rest of your staff out. What are you doing there? And the CIA guys are like, nothing, as they're shredding the documents. They gotta stay there. They gotta get everything shredded. And so they're just sitting there at the shredders going, we're just gonna stay here a little longer. The Iranian government's like, no, you gotta go. What are you doing? They're obeying orders. The students climb over the wall and they capture the 66 CIA operatives in the act of shredding the documents. They had already gotten a bunch of the documents shredded. Those college students shove those shredded documents in garbage bags. They walk over to the nearby middle schools and high schools. They go, you guys like making puzzles, right? And they put the documents back together. In our words, piece by piece, we document how Kermit Roosevelt overthrew the democracy in 1953. The students go, here it is. They make copies, give it for free to the whole world. Too bad there wasn't an internet back then. They'd have loved that. They give it away to the whole world, free documents. And then they go, okay, President Carter, go ahead, apologize. No way. We're the United States of America. Even though we've lost wars, we'll never admit it. And we're definitely never going to apologize. And so we refused. Carter wasn't going to do it. So the students said, we won't release the hostages until you do. Carter's like, I don't care. Don't. Keep them there, just CIA operatives, no one cares. And then the students go, but you know what else we have? We have the names of all your operatives in China, and in Southeast Asia, and in India, and in Pakistan. And you sure you don't want to apologize? And Carter didn't do it. And so they published all of it. In an instant, the CIA is massacred. Not literally, they just had to pull all their operatives out of the field because now the Chinese knew their name and where they were. Now everybody knew their names and where they were. And so the CIA had to start over, just like we had to do in Russia, right? October 2021, the CIA admitted that their assets in Russia were wiped out. It's amazing. I wonder where those documents came from that detailed out the location and names of all those assets. Let me think. Where could those documents have come from? Anyway, wonder. So, there's no denying what we did, but we're not going to apologize for it, and we're not going to get the hostages released. And so, time's passing. Ted Koppel creates a new TV show, Nightline. It's going to be at night. He's going to have like fun music to start the show, and then every show is going to start with how many days the innocent victim hostages have been held in captivity in Iran. And it became like this clock measuring time. And Carter's popularity rating just kept going down, down, down. So Carter, in desperation, decides to do a military operation. He's going to send helicopters in to do a rescue. And the helicopters are flying across Iran, and then they got to do mid-air refueling. That sounds like an awful idea. I know we were good at doing it now, but it turned out it was an awful idea. Two of the helicopters collide. They go down, and there's not enough helicopters now to complete the mission, so they have to abort and come back. And so now the Iranians are like dancing on these burnt-out helicopters. And Carter's popularity plunges even faster now. And then came rumors of the October surprise. At this point, the hostages are like held for a year. And there was talk that Carter had done it. He had successfully negotiated the release of the hostages. And now they were going to get released October 1980. November 1980 is the Reagan-Carter election. And so, Reagan is panicking because if the hostages get released before the election, Carter's popularity will bounce right back and he'll probably win the election. So they've got to stop this from happening. So they figure out who Carter's been negotiating with. His name is Rafsanjani. In the early days, he had his hands in so many different things that I nicknamed him the Prince, as in Machiavelli's The Prince. He was prime minister at one point. He was never president. There is no prime minister of Iran. They dissolved that position. So, but he did get into a powerful position. He never got to the top, but didn't matter. He was very powerful. And so the Reagan campaign. Now, so for the record, this is not 100% proven. It's just mostly proven. There's like 15 witnesses and multiple court documents because a lot of the material that is evidence for this actually ended up in courtrooms, and judges actually even said, yes, some of this definitely did happen. And by the time you're done with the evidence, it's probably true. I'm confident this is true. What happened was the Reagan campaign sent a group of men. They met with Rafsanjani. They came with briefcases. They put the briefcases on a desk, and they said, we'd like for you to hold the hostages at least until after the election. Rafsanjani went, I thought you said you were from the United States. They go, we are. And Rafsanjani goes, what's in the suitcases? And they go, you'll like it. It wasn't $20 bills. It was more. And so he opens it up and he goes, you know what? I'm going to see what I can do. He had successfully negotiated with the students to release the hostages. He goes back and he renegotiates with them to keep the hostages. The election happened. Reagan wins. Carter doesn't know this has happened. So he's still got his sleeves rolled up, negotiating, trying to get the hostages released. He's negotiating while Reagan's being inaugurated. Like, he was so determined to make it happen. And of course, moments after Reagan is inaugurated president, they release the hostages as planned so that Reagan can get credit for it. Isn't that cool? By the way, it is the second time that I'm aware of a US president throwing an election by working with a foreign power. The first time was when Nixon got President Tew to leave the Paris Peace Accords in 1968. And that's 100%. There's no leftover slight doubt in that one, in part because we have a recorded conversation of LBJ freaking out when he finds out what's happened. And saying, that man has committed treason, that man being Nixon. And it's one of the reasons why Nixon was so paranoid that he cheated in 72. He was worried that if a Democrat beat him in 72, they'd find out he had rigged the election in 68. So don't cheat in a race you're gonna win anyway. If you're gonna cheat, only do it in the races you're gonna lose. I just think that should be a rule, always. Also, do the math, like figure out how much you should cheat. Like, don't over cheat, because sometimes that backfires on you. Get it right. Like, work it out first. So, the hostages get released, and then Reagan decides that it would be really fun to do a proxy war with Iran. And what the United States does is it goes to Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, and it says, you have a grievance with Iran, isn't that correct? And Saddam Hussein said, yeah, our border on the Shatt al-Arab isn't quite resolved, and we'd like that straightened out. And he goes, and the Reagan guys are like, yeah, couldn't your grievance go beyond that? And they go, what do you mean? And go, isn't Khuzestan Arab? That's the Arab part of Iran. Wouldn't it be better if an Arab country ruled the Arab part of Iran? And Saddam Hussein went, now that you mention it, that does sound like a good idea. And so the Reagan guys say, well, they just decapitated their military. It's like Stalin's purges. It's gonna take them forever to recover from this. Attack them now, we'll supply you, we'll run you the weapons, whatever you need. And Saddam Hussein obliges. And in 1981, Iraq attacks Iran. It's a 8-year-long war. It's a complete disaster for both Iran and Iraq. The low number is 750,000 Iranians die, 250,000 Iraqis die. The high number is just double that. Nothing is gained. The border doesn't really change in any meaningful way, and the world is not better off for having done it. The war ends, and Iran that whole time then is in emergency mode. So whether you like the theocracy or not didn't matter. This is life and death, this is survival. There's this catastrophic war where Iranians are losing a huge number of lives. 3 people die for every Iraqi. So even though the war is a stalemate, there's no real winner in this thing, the cost to Iran was catastrophic and through the roof. And so Iranians were willing to fight for the Islamic Republic, whether they liked it or not, because this was a matter of nationalism and national identity. And then the war ends. Pretty much for no reason other than the Ayatollah Khomeini goes, you know what, why not? Let's stop. Saddam Hussein kept saying, please, let's stop. This isn't going anywhere. He's like, no, you turned it into a holy war. Saddam Hussein's like, I'm an idiot for starting the war. I should have never trusted the Americans. The war ends. Iran's trying to get back on its feet. Iraq's trying to get back on its feet. The next thing you know, the United States is smashing Iraq into the Stone Ages in 1991. And Iran's looking at it going, wow, weren't they friends just now? And obviously in the meantime, there was the whole Iran-Contra thing. What the United States did was it told the world, look, to get the Iran-Iraq war to stop, please nobody sell weapons to either side. In the meantime, we're selling Iraq just crazy amounts of weapons. And the French too, just for the record. I think even the Swedes sold them Viggens. So I think even they were like, everybody's like, yes. Nothing to either Iran or Iraq as they're sending the weapons to Iraq. Including, we sent them sarin gas and VX gas and mustard gas and anthrax, just for the record. So those weapons of mass destruction we blow up Iraq for later, we knew they had them because we had the receipts. So So we actually had the serial numbers of every rocket we sent them. That's how the UN weapons inspectors knew what to look for. They literally had the serial. That's what Scott Ritter's whole job while he was UN inspector in Iraq was. He was just looking for the serial numbers. That's all. Isn't that cool? Keep serial numbers on the weapons that you send to other countries that you think are probably violating international law. I think that's just always a good idea. The reason we did Iran-Contra, I'll do the nutshell version, was Iran desperately needed spare parts. Its entire military was US. They even had an F-14 Tomcat. They're like, what are we supposed to do? We don't have any spare parts. And so Reagan wanted to fight a terrorist war in Nicaragua. He wanted to fund the Contradoras to attack the Sandinista government. So he needed funding for it because when he went to Congress, Congress said, no, that's terrible. Let's not do that. So Reagan decided, the Constitution doesn't say I have to listen to Congress. Oh yeah, it probably does, but I haven't read it, so I don't know. And so he decides to fund them anyway. Where are you going to get the money from? Well, Oliver North comes up with the plan. Sell the Iranians the spare parts at 4 times the market value, take that money, and then launder the money. And I mean, it's a loop-de-loop launder. Like it goes to Brunei, and I think it went through, I don't remember how many countries. It's really complicated. It gets to Israel. Israel had a cache of AK-47s they kept capturing after Arab-Israeli wars that they were selling to the highest bidder. And in this case, it turns out it's the CIA. The CIA buys the AK-47s using that Iranian money and then sends them to the Contradoras so that the Contradoras can shoot Nicaragua up. That's what that was. Not neat. Anyway, Reagan does get busted for it. But Americans don't have memory, so he got away with it. Oliver North was basically called in by the House and grilled, and it was on TV. Before you knew it, somehow Oliver North had become a hero. It's like, no, he just broke the Constitution. The procedure is blindfold and in firing squad. Anyway, I must have missed the memo where traitors become heroes. How, I don't know. When was the memo issued? It's like what we've done with the word hero. You're a hero. What did I do? Grocery shopping. Were they throwing hand grenades at me while I was doing it? How am I a hero for grocery shopping? How did hero get redefined and I missed something? Doing ordinary things. Doesn't make you a hero. It probably just means you're not suffering from a depression bout. Depression sucks. So we got past the Iran-Contra scandal. Okay, so fast forward. In the late 1990s, Iran elects a guy named Khatami. So Iran is in this weird situation because, strangely enough, it is kind of democratic. This is the irony of the Islamic Republic in the 90s. That Majlis that got created in 1906 is still there, and they're holding relatively free and fair elections. The reason I'm not saying they're fully free is the following. To run for office, you had to be approved by a council. The council was a theocratic council, so they purged a bunch of potential people, but they let some people through, including this guy Khatami. Khatami thought he could get into the presidency, a position that doesn't have a lot of power, because the Islamic Republic is a monarchy. It's an absolute monarchy. Monarchy just means one person is in charge. That's all it means. It doesn't have to be hereditary. Although Ayatollah Khamenei has designated his son as his successor, so he's switching the Islamic Republic from a theocratic monarchy into a theocratic hereditary monarchy. So he's the guy really in charge, not the president. But the president, because the president is president, has a lot of symbolic power, and as a result can kind of move people and can affect policy, because the president's the guy who's supposed to execute policy. So Khatami gets in there and he tells the morality police, stop going after women for not covering their hair if they have some hair covering. And let's see if we can start easing back. The reason was the following. The hijab had become the symbol of women's oppression. Whether or not wearing hijab is oppressive doesn't matter. Having somebody stick a gun to your head and say, you're gonna wear this, you're gonna cover your hair, makes it oppressive, right? If you give the person the option and they decide they want to do it, that's their choice. But if you're forcing them to do it, they've taken choice out of the equation. We're not in anything other than oppression land. There's no two ways about it. I figure out the secrets of the universe. Let's say the Supreme Being comes to me and tells me everything I need to know about the secrets of the universe. I walk up to one of you and I say, I figured it out, here it is. And you go, I don't know. And then I take a gun and I stick it to your head and I go, you will convert to my religion now. Did I just save your soul? Probably not. I'm going to go with that. I suspect I didn't. Like, the thought that somehow violence is going to save somebody's soul is really remarkable to me. Like, talk about logic fail. In any case, that's the position the Islamic Republic suddenly found itself in, because they had had a debate. Should we do the head cover or not? And they decided, yeah, we're going to make it mandatory. This is something we're going to do. By the way, they tried to do the azan from the mosques really loudly, and they tried to make that mandatory. But one of the interesting twists on that was the Iranian people were like, we're not sure we want that. It's too noisy, and so they basically deleted that. So they were trying to do some things, it just didn't work. The hijab worked. They got women to wear the hijab, but under duress. And so Khatami is like, let's ease this up. Just so happens, when I went to Iran in 2002, Khatami was president. And what I kept seeing was women who had head covering on the back, but the whole front of their hair was completely out. Also, women have to wear a tunic, and women in 2002 in Iran were wearing the tightest garment the world has ever seen. And they would usually wear black, which, just for the record, is the most amazing color for clothing ever. It is just like, oh my God. So I was walking around Iran the whole time going, wow, this is actually really hot. So there was a rebellion. It was a fashion rebellion. It seems like a dumb thing when you think about it, like, oh my God, you're taking your rebellion through fashions. But that was exactly the focal point for women's oppression. The reform movement doesn't work. It fails. In 1999, the supreme leader orders an attack on a university. They kill a bunch of students. It's a disaster. Khatami sort of sputters after that. He's still holding on. He gets replaced by Ahmadinejad, the Bush of the Middle East, 60 IQ, can't string together an intelligent sentence, says one dumb thing after the other. You're like, oh my God, did you say that? And my favorite was when he said, Iran doesn't have gays. Anyway, there's a fun story about Khamenei related to that. There is, actually. Anyway, let's just say Khamenei might not be straight. Just leave it at that. The Islamic Republic reform movement fails. Ahmadinejad is this right-wing lunatic, takes Iran the exact opposite direction. We played a role in this. When 9/11 happened, Khatami issued an official statement from the Islamic Republic. It said, the people of Iran condemn all forms of terrorism, and the people of Iran stand with the people of the United States. We are here to offer anything you need in assistance. In an instant, Khatami had ended decades of hatred and anger with one statement. He'd even apologized for the Iran hostage crisis in the last few years of the Clinton administration. I think it was 99. He said, we regret that. That's something. We didn't apologize for overthrowing the government yet. We did it. Obama did it. He was like, all right, fine. We're sorry. Our bad. But George Bush Jr., he's going to do his first State of the Union. It's 2002. The whole world's going to watch because 9/11 just happened. And what does he say? There is an axis of evil that runs from North Korea through Iran to Iraq. And the Iranians go, what are you talking about? Because not only did they offer us assistance, they gave us assistance. We told them we're going to blow up the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the Iranians go, dude, we've been fighting a proxy war we have a whole group of soldiers on the battlefield who are Afghans who fight that we supply. We'll give you their contacts. And you can use them as your ground forces. And Bush is like, sure. And the next thing you know, he's calling Iran evil. That was it. That was the end of the reform movement, because all the hardliners went, oh, you work with the great Satan, they backstab you. This is what you get. You should have never helped them. And of course, the average Iranian's like, yeah, it looks like that to me from here. So, in 2009, there's the Green Movement. The Iranian people rise up. They're attempting democracy again. Their goal is to to reform the Islamic Republic, not to overthrow it. Their goal is to force the Islamic Republic to make dramatic changes, especially around women's rights, but everything. And the Green Movement doesn't last very long. It fizzles out and it goes down. It taught the world a big lesson, though. So what the Green Movement would do is they would protest in the most important spot in every city. So in the most important location in Tehran. And then they'd go home for dinner, and then in the morning when they'd show up at that spot to protest again, the police would have it cordoned off. So the only way to get into that spot would have been to battle the police. So then the protesters would go to the second most important spot in the city and protest there, and then they'd go home for dinner, and when they come back in the morning, that's cordoned off. So then they'd go to the third and the fourth, and by the time they were at the 16th, it was like an alley that nobody even saw, and the revolution was over. The Arab Spring learned that lesson, so when they took to the streets, they permanently occupied that location 24/7. And then when we decided to do the Arab Spring, we took that lesson and we called it Occupy Wall Street. Isn't that cool? So 2019 rolls along. Iran has another attempt. It doesn't last. It burns out pretty quickly. Earlier this year, Khuzestan, the southwest corner, the Arab part, it's Arab minority now as far as I know. It's majority Persian, but it's traditionally the Arab part. It went into rebellion. It has not actually stopped being in rebellion. It has maintained that rebellion. But then, a little bit over 7 weeks ago, I think we're closing in on the 8-week mark, an Iranian woman, actually she's a Kurd to be precise, right? So she's not a Persian Iranian, she's a Kurdish Iranian. She was in Tehran visiting. The Kurds are not allowed to have their first names. So she went by Mahsa Amini is her Persian name. And she shows up. Her head covering wasn't on correctly. She gets arrested. She's put into the morality police van. And all the witnesses say, one of the morality police, she was mouthing off. She was telling him to go to hell. She was calling him all sorts of ugly names. One of the morality police guys got mad and he raised his leg and he kicked her in the head and smashed her head against the metal side of the truck. And then when she gets to the police station, the cameras are there, it's rolling, so you can see her. She walks over. She looks like she's gonna sit down. She gets up. She walks over to a person. It looks like she's gonna have a conversation with the person. She falls down, she dies. It turns out she had a brain injury and it was swelling, and it finally swelled to the point where it caused her to lose consciousness. That's why she passes out in that moment. And then she dies of her injuries. That's it, that was the spark. Iran has now been in a revolution now. It'll be 8 weeks here shortly, and there's no signs it's letting up. In Iranian culture, on the 40th day after a person dies, you have to have a ceremony to talk about that person, to mourn that person. So these 40ths keep popping up. Like just 2 weeks ago, Mahsa Amini's 40th came up, and people took to the streets, and the violence level increased because now people are reminded and they're angry and they're in large crowds. And so the people who were killed in the early days of this revolution now, their 40ths keep popping up. So about 10 days ago, no, was it more? 2 weeks ago, let's say, the Revolutionary Guard leader said, we're going to start using live bullets. We're going to intentionally start killing you. You need to stop. You need to get out of the streets. He said it on a Friday. That Saturday and Sunday, there was definitely a drop in the protest. People definitely got scared. By Monday, they were protesting again. Before you knew it, the protests were even larger than they were before. So it didn't work. They weren't intimidated off the streets. And then what happened was the government actually came and said, you got to stop killing people because these 40ths are causing so much more revolutionary force afterwards. So you have one guy saying, we're going to kill, and then you have the supreme leader saying, please stop. We can't manage this. Iran's economy is on the verge of collapse. The petrochemical industry went on strike. The oil industry went on strike. The gas industry went on strike. A bunch of the truckers, not all of them, but a bunch of them went on strike. There are whole bazaars that have gone on strike. There are whole segments now of the Iranian economy that's in free fall. And of course, this is on top of all the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran. And so the Iranian state can't do this forever. There is an end point to this. One of the hopes was that oil prices would continue to plunge because that takes out the ability of the Islamic Republic to fund itself. And then OPEC raised oil prices to stabilize Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. And so that's not happening. But nonetheless, the Iranian state is collapsing. The question is, what happens next? So this revolution is an unusual revolution. It's unlike probably anything ever before. And one of the reasons is it's a woman's uprising. The slogan for this revolution is Zan Zendegi Azadi, which means life, women, liberty. Like that's the slogan for the revolution. The songs that they're singing are about this. The chants, the marches. A whole cadre of the revolutionary force are basically middle school and high school and college student women. In Iran, the women are actually running the revolution. So when I talked about petrochemical and gas and petroleum, those guys are all men. It's a 90% male-dominated economic field who are siding with the women in the revolution. Like they're clear about this. It's not only about women's rights. There's economic problems. There's this need for democracy that Iranians have never let go of. But women's rights are at the core of it because it's become the symbol of oppression for everybody, even the men. And that's what's really interesting about this. Because if you look at some of the protests, the hijab is gone. Like all these women have torn off their hijab. But there are also this cadre of totally covered women, that not just hijab, but even chador, which is more, it covers, they tie it off under your chin, who are standing with the women who don't have hijab, who are saying, we want women to have the right to choose. We want to choose to wear hijab, but we want them to choose not to if they don't want to, so we're standing with them. There's an amazing video. A woman has just been captured by the morality police. What a disgusting group of people. You're the morality police? Anyway, get a job. Like, I don't know, construction or something. Build something. Worthless. Anyway, this woman gets captured for not wearing hijab. All of a sudden, these covered women, they're wearing hijab and chador, come charging at the cops. They're beating the cops. The woman, the uncovered woman, escapes. By the way, she looked like a gazelle. She's like leaping through the air, running. And in the meantime, the covered women, after the woman has escaped, they just sort of walk away. And the morality police are like, what's just happened? So in other words, this isn't about, in Iran, this isn't about they want to topple the regime and then do something weird like ban Islam. What they want to do is they want to topple the regime, create a democracy, and then have the freedom for people to choose the kind of life they want to have going forward. They want to terminate the theocracy and replace it with a secular republic. They don't want to terminate their culture. They don't want to de-Muslimize. And I think sometimes people are seeing it in that framework, which is wrong and bizarre. But in the meantime, you've got places in Europe saying, should we ban hijab to show solidarity with Iran? And they were getting this really loud group of women from Iran going, no, that's not any better. You're just flipping the oppression. You're still telling women what to do. We have an idea. Let women decide what they want to do. Which would be neat to do in Texas. Wouldn't that be neat if women had rights in Texas too? I think we should do that here. I think you should be inspired by the women of Iran. There was a women's uprising in 1975 in Iceland. Those are the only two now that I know of. The one that's taking place in Iran and the one in Iceland. The one in Iceland not only succeeded, they drafted a new constitution. The women successfully toppled the state. Iceland is probably the most democratic country on the planet right now. So it worked, it transformed. From what I can tell, Iran totally has that potential in this moment. It's not certain it will happen, but that's actually what this moment is. The Iranian people are sophisticated, they're intelligent, they have the potential to have a massive economy. They're the 21st largest economy on earth right now, with their economy being flushed down the toilet. So if they could get out of that and rebound, they'd probably be like the 12th or 14th largest economy. This is a superpower state with enormous resources. They're one of two countries on the planet that has an advanced drone research program. The United States is the other one. That's why you keep hearing in the news that there are Iranian drones in the Ukraine, because the Iranian drones are so much more sophisticated than the Russian drones, right? That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an incredible state with incredible potential that's been crushed by this conservative regime that wants to superimpose its idea of morality. And it's not working. It's killing the Iranian people, and they're done. But who knows what the future looks like? You know what I mean? It's like predicting an election. It's like rolling dice. All right, I think we're out of time. I'll field one question because we don't have a lot of time.
So you mentioned America's role in the history of Iran over and over again. What do you think the role will be now, and what do they kind of want to happen?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So the question was, because he's not mic'd up, what's the role of the United States basically going forward? So the pessimist part of me says that what the United States is going to do is use the CIA to try to undermine the revolution and install a new monarchy. So the Shah's son is still alive. He has said himself that he doesn't necessarily want to be the monarch, but then he came back and he said, well, but maybe I could do a temporary thing until the state gets stabilized. I don't trust anybody. I assume every politician is always trying to figure out how to maximize their power. So, but for all we know, he's a wonderful guy and he really will do that. My thinking, however, is that the Iranian people aren't going to go from it, from what I can tell from what's happening inside Iran. If it's up to the diaspora, so the people living, especially in the United States, maybe not even the Iranians in Europe, but the Iranians in the United States, I think they would love to have the monarchy restored. But I don't see it from what I'm seeing in Iran. I think they want a secular republic. My hope is that the United States will stop being the bad guy in foreign policy. It's time to stop interfering in that way and turn this around and use this as an opportunity to mend this bridge. Obama apologized for overthrowing the government in '53. You know, the first steps in the 12-step program is you got to apologize to the people you hurt. Well, we're there. Iran's apologized. We've apologized. We're in great shape. So all we got to do is stop interfering in a negative way. They could be a great trade partner, and maybe we could be friends again. I mean, why not? That could be on the table. But I think the first step would be to keep the CIA out. There's another part of your question, though, that I think is really important. And that's what can the American people do to stand in solidarity with the Iranian people? One of the things that Iran has been asking for is for there to be protests overseas. They say it gives them hope because they see the support. So like that protest that just happened in Berlin, I want to say it was like 10 days ago. Oh my God. It was insane. Now, it was largely Iranian. They were from the diaspora coming from all over Europe, going to Berlin, but there were a bunch of Germans there too, hundreds of thousands of people. I've been at multiple protests here are they protests or rallies? I've been at multiple rallies here in Austin. In fact, I spoke at one in front of the Capitol. Lloyd Doggett was there, he also spoke. And one of the things I'm seeing is it's mostly Iranians. It's not 100% Iranians, but it's probably like 85% Iranians. When you find out that there's one of these protests, show up and show your non-Iranianness. And I think it matters. I think it matters a lot. I've been protesting for 30-something years now. And one of the things that I notice is you go to an event and it's overwhelmingly that group. So, right, you show up at a Palestinian rights event, like during the Gaza massacre in 2008, 2009. And, there's a lot of Arabs there, and there's some non-Arabs there, but there's no Iranians there. Well, there were two. I knew both of them. And then then you go to the Green Movement event that same year, 2009, and there weren't any Arabs there. It was just Iranians, and there weren't any white people there. It was really just Iranians. And every time I kept thinking, man, if everybody cared about the other guy just a little bit more, and we could make these events cross over, maybe we'd have some power and we wouldn't be so fragmented. By the way, there is great value in showing up to these events, even if it's not your group, because you get experience doing them. For example, my role in the Green Movement in 2009 was to get in front of the Iranian protesters and slow them down. They just wanted to race, and it's like, no, our goal is to mess up traffic. Slow down, slow down. And so I was this guy walking backwards doing that, and then afterwards they would ask me, how do you know all this stuff? Well, because I was at this protest and that protest and this protest. In other words, don't wait until your group's on the line. Get out there and do it now. Care about other people. In this case, it's the Iranians. And it's an amazing event because, if you're a feminist, it's there. If you believe in religious freedom, it's there. If you believe in democracy, this is that revolution. There are all these things on the line that most people, I think, can get behind. Anyway, so my hope is that we as Americans will start to support that way without getting heavy-handed and interfering, which is our ugly past. They already know what they need. We don't need to tell them what they need. Trust me. When I was there in 2002, I just walk up to random Iranians and just start political conversations. And it was amazing how informed, walking down the street. Like you walk down the street here and start a political conversation, you're just gonna get gibberish. It's nonsense. Oh, by the way, Jon Stewart did that. He went to Iran and did a show. And I want to say it was 2007, so it was like 5 years after my experience. And he had the same experience. He just walk up to random Iranians. And you know how they always have those comedy things where you walk up to a random American and you go, did you know? And then you tell them some wrong fact and they're like, oh, I didn't know. Australia is 3 times larger than Russia? For real? And the capital of Australia is Singapore, and and you mock us. Don't be that person. All right, so we're definitely out of time. We're over, and so I'm going to have to call it here. Thanks so much for coming.